What happens when a high-powered attorney hits rock bottom and decides to tell the world about it? Our guest today is going to share her story of addiction, healing, and using her voice to break the stigma, especially in professional spaces where silence is the norm.
Welcome to the Sober Life Rocks podcast. You may have made the decision not to drink alcohol, or at the very least, not at work-related events. Whether you've never been a drinker, are in recovery, or made a health-related decision, we see you, and you are not alone. In today's world, networking, socializing, and celebrations often happen over drinks, and the struggle can be real. Through this podcast, we're changing that narrative. We're here to create a community where individuals like you, who choose not to drink or drink less, can find camaraderie, support, and practical advice.
Before we get started, Sober Life Rocks is hosting our conference Amplify Sober Voices on January 15th, 2026, where we're bringing together influencers, creators, speakers, writers, podcasters to reimagine what a truly inclusive, alcohol-optional world looks like. And if you're interested in being part of this growing movement we're seeing, we'd love to have you join us. Learn more at amplifysobervoices.com. Now, my guest today is Lisa Smith, who is a powerhouse in the sober space. She's the author of the award-winning memoir, Girl Walks Out of a Bar, which chronicles her descent into and recovery from high-functioning alcohol and cocaine addiction while working at a prestigious New York law firm. Lisa's also the co-host of Recovery Rocks podcast with Tanya Laura, where they tackle everything from sober dating and pop culture to mental health. And on top of that, she's the co-creator of the Sobriety deck, a 50-card tool offering daily encouragement and insight for anyone exploring life without alcohol. Lisa is living proof that no matter how far you fall, there's always a path back. And often that path becomes your purpose. Lisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here. And thank you for that very warm welcome. This is just so happy to be here with you in this space.
Well, I'm happy to say it on air because I just said it to you a minute ago. When I first started this podcast, I made a list of 4 or 5 people that I really, really wanted to talk to, and you were on that list. And I just wanted to wait until we were established enough to be able to have the credibility to bring you on. And I'm just filled with gratitude that you were willing to do this with us today.
Oh, I'm honored. I'm honored. That really means a lot to me to be on that list. It is. It's a real pleasure, honor, all of it to be with you.
Well, and you have been one of the pioneers in my mind of people who were willing to speak up at a time when that wasn't being done. I mean, I've been sober 20 years and I stayed silently sober for 18 and a half of those years because I was afraid. But maybe could you just share a little bit of your story with us? Because not just where you ended up, but back where you started, like successful on paper, but struggling in silence. And what did life look for you at the height of your addiction? And what led you to finally speak your truth?
So the last 18 months of my addiction was about a 12-year downward spiral. You know, the way it goes from, I don't have to explain the spiral, but the last 18 months were alcohol around the clock. I had to have it next to me on the nightstand because I couldn't get out of bed without a drink. And then cocaine. And the reason for the cocaine was because at the time, I was no longer practicing law, but I had a big job as a director of client development at a big firm in New York. And I had to go to work. So the cocaine, I don't recommend it to anyone. It's a particularly awful journey, but the cocaine would counteract the effects of the alcohol. So, I would need to drink because my body was sick and tremors and everything when I woke up. But then I'd get a little drowsy, slurry. So I'd have to have the cocaine. And, it was just that 24/7. Once I started, I couldn't stop. So I'd sneak out at lunch. I would work from home a ton. I didn't have a boss in New York, so it wasn't, I wasn't sort of under anyone's eye in particular. I worked directly with the partners. And, that was really, I would have myself together when I needed, I would sit in that kind of state, which was an equilibrium for me, the balance between the drinking and the cocaine. I would sit in 8:30 a.m. partner meetings of client teams and, sit there and wonder who else had been drinking this morning, because how could it possibly just be me, right? Um,
But there's a pretty big drinking culture in the legal profession, just with taking clients out and all of the things, right?
Yes, it's soaked in alcohol, the legal profession. Yeah, everything. And it really is. It's the go-to stress management tool, unfortunately. And it's a terrible one. So yeah, I mean, that was the other, like I would drink at firm parties and things like that. And so did, it didn't look unusual.
Yeah.
Um, but so basically those last 18 months when the cocaine really came into the picture, that was the beginning of the end for me. And I was fortunate. I mean, I could have gotten, no one ever said a word to me. And later, actually, when the book came out, um, the New York Law Journal did an article on me, and I was like, I didn't name my prior firms in my book, although you could look on my LinkedIn; it's not hard to find. And they had up in the article where you could click, it was like related links, and they were my two law firms, and they had spoken to my law firm that I was at when I bottomed out, and said, like, did you know what was going on with her? And they said, we had no idea. And they, much to their credit, said, in fact, they had brought me back to speak to their lawyers when they found out that,
Mhm.
because I was bad when I was there. And it was really, they were like, we don't want anyone to go through that alone again. So, yeah, so basically I could have gotten, this is the myth of high functioning, right? High functioning until exactly the day you're not, right? The day you get a DUI. In my case, maybe, or the day you miss a court date or screw up a filing. My case, it could have been a day where someone walked into my office and found some cocaine, or, called me out on being drunk or something like that. And then I wouldn't have been so high functioning, right? And
Mhm.
the other piece of high functioning that's a myth really is that you may be functioning, but you're functioning at a job and in a way that is way below your potential and your capacity. And
Which we don't realize until after the
no,
fact.
we think I'm fine. I'm doing my thing. Everything's okay. And then for me, when I got sober, um, 10 months after I did not tell my firm when I got sober, and I'll explain that. But 10 months later, I took a job at a firm at a much higher level that I couldn't have even interviewed before. But what happened to me, my crash out was one morning I had calibrated and done the whole thing. It was a Monday morning. So I'd been drinking and using all weekend. And I was on my way. I lived in New York City, and I was on my way to the elevator in my building. And on the way there, I just got like hit, overwhelmed, whatever. Something happened. And I was like, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack, or I finally overdosed. And I now know that it was an anxiety attack.
Mm.
But what was important about it in that moment was that, like, for all the mornings before, because I hated myself all the time. I would say, I hate you to myself in the mirror every day. So, for all those mornings that I had woken up and been like, oh, I wish I didn't wake up, when I really thought I was going to die in the hallway of my apartment, something snapped. And I was like, I don't want to die. And I know that I need help.
Mm.
I knew I was physically addicted to the extent that I would they typically do a 3 to 5 day detox in a hospital. I needed the full 5 days. And, that was the beginning of it. And when I was in the hospital, I think this is important too. Um, I was diagnosed with a major depressive disorder and an anxiety disorder. And basically, the psychiatrist in there said, you've been medicating these issues all
Mhm.
your life. It runs in my family. I had a genetic predisposition. I get these things. And then I put myself into this. I was always a perfectionist and always had to get the best grades, the best whatever. And then when I became a practicing lawyer in a giant law firm in New York, that was, I became a nightly drinker as a first year associate at my law firm. So, yeah. So I'm sorry.
So this is the thing that I know for me was a big hurdle. When you had to go to the hospital, like, how did you handle your work situation at that moment?
Yeah. So what I did, I knew that, this was 21 years ago. So very different environment. It was not spoken about at all, nothing. I knew that under HIPAA, under the privacy laws, that I could be out sick for 5 days. But if I was going to be out for a sixth day, I would need to produce a doctor's note, and I was not going to do that. So what I did that morning, before I went to the hospital was, and I didn't know where I was going. My doctor didn't know where to refer me. I ended up in like the worst psych hospital in Manhattan on like lockdown detox unit that was really, really scary. But what I did in that morning before I went to work, I emailed the partners I worked with and I emailed the people who worked below me and said, listen, I had a medical emergency over the weekend. I'm fine. Please don't worry about me. But I'm going to be in the hospital recovering and I'm not going to have my phone. So I'm going to be out of touch this week and I'll see you Monday. Right. And so that was it. And like when I got back and then, really what I should have done after that and what I would encourage everyone to do, especially now that it's been normalized so much more, is, when they came to me after the 5 days and were like, okay, let's talk now about where you're going to go for rehab, right? Because they just cleaned me out and let's talk about rehab. And they were showing me these pamphlets like this, this place has horse therapy. This place is, in the woods, whatever. I was like, I didn't sign up for that. I'm not doing that. And against their advice, I wouldn't go away. I agreed to do intensive outpatient 2 nights a week in Manhattan and after work. So I didn't have to tell anybody. But I always encourage people, if you have the opportunity to go, take it, take it, take it. It's the biggest gift. Stay as long as you can. But I did my rehab, 2 nights a week outpatient after work. And I started going to 12-step meetings. And that was where I really like dug in. Like the first time I walked into a 12-step meeting, I looked around this room. It was in a church and there were all these people eating lunch. And I was like, asked one of them, like, do you know where the 12-step meeting is? And they were like, this is it. And I'm like, really? This bunch of normal looking people eating lunch? Like, how is that? And it was just, I heard my story. I could identify with those people. I felt like people, and I still do. I felt this in my outpatient rehab too. Like the people in those rooms knew my brain better than the people who were closest to me in the world.
Mhm.
And, so that has been what I've clung to.
So much that is so familiar to me. And just again, for anybody listening, I had the same decision to make about treatment. And I fortunately had somebody advise me that I could get a doctor's note that was generic.
Yes, you can. You
And I
can.
did.
Yes.
And so I was able to take that 30 days. And the company was very good in that they never asked me when I got back where I was. It was simply just like, are you okay? And I was like, yes, I am. So it can be done with some anonymity, but you're here because you broke the stigma, like you decided to come out. So what in the world motivated that moment?
To tell you the truth, at the beginning, I had no intention of going public, right? But I had hid my addiction to a huge extent. Everybody knew I drank too much, but so did, so many people around me. And so when I, with my friends and family, one day it was like, I'm checking into a hospital. I have a problem with alcohol. Everybody, when they were like, what are you talking about? And so when I got out, everybody was like, what happened? Whoa, what was this? What was that? And like I said, I was in a really crazy place for detox, and I would start to tell the story, and then I'd have to tell the story to somebody else and whatever. And so finally I like wrote it down, like the parts in the hospital are, I think, quite vivid because I wrote them down immediately, so I started writing down. I just wrote 5 days of what happened in the hospital. And then I really got into it, like, for myself. I started writing as like my own therapy to figure out, like, yeah, what did happen? And it became this practice. In the morning, I would go to a meeting at 7:30 in the morning, but I would get up at like 5. And then because I was awake, right? I was sober. And I would write for like an hour or something in the morning. I did that for 10 years. Somewhere along the way, after about probably like 3 or 4 years, I decided, maybe it was 3, I went to a random thing with a friend, like to a nonfiction workshop. The Iowa Writing Workshop has a summer program, summer writing festival, anybody can sign up for. So we went to that. And I got encouragement, like, you should make this a book. And so then I didn't know what I was doing. So I started taking nonfiction writing classes at night at NYU. I got into a workshop. But basically, once I decided I was going to write a book, so probably, not that long in, a few years in, I was like thinking, it never occurred to me to not write it as a memoir under my name, because the whole purpose to me, I'm like, why would I? I'm a voracious reader. So I, pulled every memoir and read every memoir on the shelves. And I was like, where is the woman who didn't lose everything, but had a really rough time and is in the corporate world, and I don't see my story? And I thought about it. And like I said earlier, I'm like, if this was me, like, I couldn't possibly be the only one, and I just felt really compelled to. I knew how brutal it was. It was so awful that if there was any way that my story might help somebody else, that was the way I wanted to do it. And so really I was, I never thought it would get published. All of these things, even when I wrote, I was like, this, who gets a book published? I was not, my expectations were very low, which is why I wrote it like no one would read it. But I wanted to, at the end, the publisher was like, and my PR person was like, do you want to change your name maybe, or do you want to fictionalize this? And I was like, no, I want to own this, like this, because there are people out there just like me that can't find that book on the bookshelf, and I want it to be there.
So what year did it come out?
2016.
And what kind of reaction did you get from people who knew you?
Yeah. Well, my friends and my family all read along the way. But work was the big thing, right? So I told you I had taken this job at a much higher level, and I wrote for 10 years, before I got the book contract. So I went to this other firm, and they knew me sober. They never saw me drink. No one asked me, but I didn't go around telling people. And I was the director of business development for them. And, put together a team. I started that group for them. And after 10 years, right when I got my book contract, my book deal, I got promoted to deputy executive director of the firm. So they'd known me for 10 years, and they put me in this position where I was, had much,
Visibility.
That was so much responsibility. And I had a seat on the management committee. I was in firm management. So like I sat at the front of the room with the two co-chairs and the executive director at twice weekly or every other week partner lunches, and would talk to them about their billing rates and about, what work we're going after, what we're doing, very business oriented. And I had shared my story with some of the people there, some of the partners, because you become friends with people, but it was not known. And so when I was first going to have something coming out, because I had articles coming out before the book was coming out, I went to I had to start with the the management committee and tell them. And I went into first the chair of the firm, who I had a great relationship with. And, people knew I wrote, but they didn't know what about, because I would go on these retreats and stuff. And I said, hey, I think you heard I got a book deal. And he said, yeah, that's great. And then I walked in, shut his door and said, now let me tell you what it's about. And I sat there and I overshare, being like, but I never got arrested and I never, I never got hospitalized, whatever it was. And he listened and was like, I know people. He said, I think that's incredible, that you're doing that. And he said, people really, I know people I wish would get so, like, very supportive. And then really on the way out, he said, out of his office, he said, listen, I can't tell you how every individual partner is going to react to this, but I can tell you that from the firm perspective, you have 1000% support. Mm-hmm. And then there was a big study about, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, totally. Oh my God. Yeah. It was huge. It was huge. And, what was interesting was that when I would tell them and other partners, then after I told the management committee, it didn't really faze anybody. In fact, like, they had questions. Like, one of the partners was like, oh, I'm so glad you brought this up. Like, maybe you know the answer. My brother-in-law just got out of rehab and he's coming to Thanksgiving dinner. Is it okay if I serve wine? Like, people wanted to talk about this in 2014, Yeah. And then there was a big study about lawyers and substance use and mental health disorders. And I wrote an op-ed on it that was published in the Washington Post. And the chair and the managing partner, sent it to everyone in the firm, including all staff, and said, we're really proud of Lisa and whatever. So I worked with great people. I didn't expect that they would, I wasn't embarrassed. I was sober 10 years. I wasn't ashamed, but I didn't know. And I said, if this is something that is a choice that I need to make, you'll let me know. And they were like, no, why?
That is amazing. I mean, so I've told the story before, but at 10 years sober, I decided that I was going to, for the first time, break my silence in my professional life. And I'm a speaker coach, and I had the chance to speak at this conference of speakers. And this was my business was about a year and a half old, and it's like, this was my big shot. And one of the things I always tell people to do when you're speaking in front of a group that doesn't know you is to open with some sort of story that shows you your heart and your purpose and your beliefs. And so I chose to tell a story where I talked about being raised in an alcoholic family and the chaos that ensued, and that I vowed I would never be like my mom. And that by the time I was in my 20s, I was just like my mom. Oh, and wow. That, I imposed the chaos on my kids and all the things. But really what was happening was I didn't have any adulting skills. And the only thing my mother had ever taught me as to how to deal with stress or joy was drinking.
Yes.
And so, but I didn't have any other tools. And so then, as I shared in this opening story to my audience, that when I did finally get sober, and at the time I said 10 years ago, then mentors started showing up in my life. Women who taught me how to dress more professionally, how to speak more professionally, how to be a good mother, how to be a good friend, like all of the things that I just didn't learn growing up, and that I can never repay those people. But the best that I can do is to pay it forward, which is why, as a speaker coach, I'm here to help you become the best version of yourself.
It's amazing.
Well, in that moment, like people were hanging on every word. The rest of the talk went great. I had people running up to me afterwards, some of whom wanted to hire me, some of whom related to me. But I had two very influential people in that group pull me aside separately at different times later that evening and say, great job, Margie. Really appreciate your talk, but you might not want to talk about that sober thing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And so because I had been so nervous about that, and my worst fears were realized that somebody judged me or might judge me, that was it. I stayed silent for another 8.5 years.
Oh my gosh. Oh, wow.
And so what a gift that you had. But I would ask you now today, with your perspective, your experience, and also just knowing things like that happen to people like me, today in 2025, how would you recommend that somebody who is silently sober think about what that is doing to them as a, not entirely integrated person, but also how to maybe have those conversations in the workplace?
Sure, sure. I mean, that's a really great question. And I think there's a sort of spectrum of people and amount of story you might share and how and when you might share it. Like, one thing I always tell people is that, I was fortunate because I always tell people, get help as early as you can if you see a problem, because I was fortunate. I was able to put myself, in the hospital. I controlled my own story. If you don't get sober and, like if you're high functioning like me and one day you get busted, with something, or something goes terribly wrong, then all of a sudden they're in charge of your story in an important way. And
Great.
so I always say your story is your own, to do with, to give people, who you decide to give, when you decide to do it, how much you decide to share is entirely up to you. And I've had people, and first of all, I really encourage people who are earlier on in sobriety to really think about it. Because I've had some people approach me who've been like, oh my gosh, I'm sober 3 months. It's so amazing. I know everybody else would love it. I want to tell my firm so maybe I can help people. And I was like, I would always be like, whoa, hold on. Think about what it's going to mean for your sobriety. Do you, at 3 months sober, want to run the risk of having a negative reaction at work? Because it's true, reactions are much better now. Look, I couldn't believe how lucky I was in 2014. And I only did it too because I knew these people knew me, trusted me, and liked me, and so I think about what the impact's going to be if you don't versus if you do share something, right? So if it's eating you up, like there is a close friend and you see or there's somebody in your office that you see is definitely struggling and you have a relationship with that person, I had this experience with someone who worked for me, who I knew. And one day when she was, terribly late, like didn't show up and whatever. And I was like, you're under a lot of stress. I know you are. And, I can tell you, when I was under a lot of stress, I drank a lot. And she was like, really? And I said, yeah, I had to stop, so, and then, a year later, she came to me and said, I started going to 12 step after you spoke to me, and I'm about to celebrate a year,
Oh, that's beautiful. It's just
Yeah.
singles, yeah, just those little breadcrumbs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. It is definitely attraction, not recruitment, right?
Yeah.
But so, yeah, I think only share, like, consider if you need to, if you want to, because it's something you want to do and you feel you can help somebody or it's going to be a good thing. Do it carefully with someone you trust. Don't blurt out the worst thing that happened. Just talk about the fact that you've had struggles in the past and this is the path you took, something like that, and see how it can help. if it's not, like, if it is a matter of people at my work functions are asking me, I used to drink with them and now they're like, why? I mean, it happened to me, right? I went back that week, the week after I went in the hospital. No one knew I was in the hospital. And, the guy, my best friend at work, who I loved, was like, oh man, we got to catch up. Do you want to hit the bar tonight? And I was like, actually, I didn't, I just said, I can't drink. I'm on medication, which was true at the time. And I still take, it's not for everybody, but I still take medication for my mental health issues. But, he was like, wow, well, that sucks. And I was like, yeah, you got no idea, you know. But at parties, people would go, Lisa Smith, you're not drinking. And I would be like, yeah, not tonight. And like, nobody is entitled to your story or why you're not drinking on a particular night. And in fact, if they're egging you on about drinking or watching what you're drinking, they might want to look at themselves, right? People who don't have any kind of issue with, this was another thing I learned that I really couldn't have imagined when I was drinking, that people who aren't who don't have an issue with alcohol, they're not paying attention to what you're drinking, what somebody else is drinking. And I couldn't believe that there were actually people really at these functions who didn't drink, just didn't drink, don't like
No,
it,
crazy.
religious reasons, doing this, health challenge.
And
What,
yeah,
I don't feel like it tonight. It's Tuesday, right? So, to the extent that there is, I think sharing for the sake of sharing is for people you feel particularly close to and you feel like they've become a friend and you want to be honest with them and trust them. But sharing because you think, people should know this thing about you, is another thing. And really think about the impact it will have on you after you say those words, right?
now I will say that I 1,000% agree with you. My first, you know, certainly 3, 4 years of sobriety, I was just doing the work. I
Yes.
was figuring myself out. I was learning how to navigate all of the things that I used to navigate with alcohol. My struggle was that my job was literally to take people out and wine them and dine them to become consultants for our company. So I had to navigate through all of that. But I wish my story had been different at that 10-year mark, because what I now know was when we started Sober Life Rocks, at 18 and a half years sober, and I finally started, like, speaking my truth in all parts of my life. Lisa, I felt like my cells realigned themselves. I felt like I was integrated in a way that I had never imagined. And I didn't know that I wasn't that person. I didn't know that I was missing that integration, because I didn't think of it wasn't at the forefront of my mind. So I do
I,
think that there comes a time
yeah. Yeah.
when the stigma needs, I mean, when people quit smoking, it's like, oh, good job.
Right.
People quit drinking, it's like, oh, did you have a problem?
Right. Oh, there's something wrong with you.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I don't know. I feel like there has to come a time for us when we can normalize this and not
Yeah.
have it be the
Yeah.
problem.
Right. Right. And I totally agree with that. And it's got to, I love that idea of, all your cells realigning. Because for me, when I started speaking up, I hated public speaking. And then all of a sudden I just couldn't wait to go speak, right? Like, it was my purpose. I was driven to do that. And I will tell you, I've had people, people do are, there wasn't anybody like me talking about these issues when the book came out. But now there are plenty of people who do talk about it. And you would be surprised when this never happened. This didn't happen. So the book's been out now for 9 years, and it's been a gradual thing, but now it's really true when I speak, because I speak a lot to law firms. And I was speaking once to one of the most prestigious firms in the world, and it was a very laced up Wall Street kind of firm. And after my talk, I asked for questions, and it was virtual. It was over COVID, and the one of the chairs of one of the biggest departments weighed in and said, "This isn't a question, but I haven't talked about this before, but I've been sober for 25 years, and if anyone wants to talk to me about it, please do. My door is open." And I almost fell out of my chair because, when you get that message from the top, in an organization, it's very top down. And, people within the organization, that's a big, if I were an associate at that and I, decided I wanted to at that firm and I felt comfortable and I decided I wanted to be open, share my experience because I wanted to help people. I would feel comfortable going to that partner and saying, or telling, well, and even going to HR and saying, I know, mental health in the law week is coming up. Is it possible I'd be willing to talk about this or whatever it is? When you get that call, follow it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's amazing. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why we are holding the Amplify Sober Voices conference, because I do feel like people, once you do get sober and you've gotten your feet under you, however long that takes, we are called to want to share with others,
Yeah.
to help, whether it's in our workplaces like that amazing managing partner did, or whether it's on a podcast or whatever it is. And the more that, following in the footsteps of trailblazers like you, the more that we can share our stories and share our successes and share the things that open up and the amazing life that we never knew that we weren't having.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Oh yeah.
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 So speaking of amazing life, I want to know about this card deck of yours. I saw you have it. Hold it up again.
Oh yeah. So Tawny Lara, my podcast partner, and I, we are intergenerational. We're 20 years apart. I'm as old as her mother. But we have a lot. We just are. She's basically my best friend. And with the podcast, we had all these things. We talk about all these things. We've got over 250 episodes. We're probably coming up on 300. And, we love tarot cards, and there's all kinds of decks out. I don't know if you've seen like for your calm your nervous system or recipes or anything. And Tawny was like, you know what? There's no sober card deck. And we confirmed that and we couldn't. So we pitched it. This is it, the sobriety deck. And it's for anyone who's sober or just examining. You don't have to be sober for this. And the subtitle of it is Simple Practices for a Booze-Free Lifestyle. And
so read me one. Just pick one out randomly.
Sure.
Read.
So I'll start with Sobriety Toolkit. It's in 5 sections, right? Your Sobriety Toolkit, knowing yourself, relationships, showing up, and experiencing joy. So if I were new and I just pulled a card in Sobriety Toolkit, this one is Find Your People.
Oh,
right. So then we write about, as TED speaker Johan Hari says, addiction is the opposite of connection. And, then we have suggestions for people who want to go out and find a sober support system.
And where do we find this?
Oh, it's from Penguin Random House, and it's everywhere. It's in a lot of Barnes and Nobles. It's certainly online at Barnes and Nobles. It's on Amazon. It's in some coffee shops, some bookstores, indie bookstores. But it's definitely, it's online from all the places you can order online too.
Amazing. Lisa, I cannot tell you, I just am so inspired. I'm so inspired by the idea that you were able to go to your bosses and have this conversation and have it well received. And I think that translates to today.
Yes.
I think that the thing I'm taking away from this is if we can find somebody who we trust, who we have some sort of relationship with, even if we're in that dark place, like to have that one-on-one conversation with somebody and get buy-in for our path, whether we're starting out sober, whether we're 10 years sober, whatever the story might be, that's really the way forward to be able to kind of navigate our workplace as a little bit more of a whole insane person.
I think that's exactly right. And I think it's much better. Like the environment today now is really just so different. And, it is much more, we're at the point now where I feel like we're working less in stigma itself and more in the next step, which is normalizing not drinking, you know,
Yeah.
just making it, I got something in my glass, you got something in your glass, who cares? Right.
That's
And that's made possible by all the different choices that firms can put and organizations can put out there and make it like no big deal. But yes, I think you find somebody you trust, when you're certain in yourself, and you share it with them and ask, how can I help here?
yeah. And the other thing I think that I'm taking away from this is the notion that, just because we're high achieving doesn't mean that we're okay.
Oh God, no.
And so I know I get into the comparison trap, right? So I can look at somebody else and say, well, they're doing so well. Why aren't I?
Yeah.
But we don't know. We don't know
Oh
what the
yeah.
cost is to that person. We don't know what their struggles are. And we can have grace for ourselves and for others
Absolutely.
and be able to
Absolutely.
open up these conversations to be just like, there's a
Yeah.
human behind the title.
Yes. Yes. Oh, 100%. Yeah. When people, when a lot of times over the years when I've spoken, people have been like, I wouldn't have ever, I've known you, in the past, like people that I knew from professional organizations and stuff, I never would have pegged you for this. And I was like, well, and that's what I would say when I stood up, and said, this is what it looks like, right? It's not the stereotype.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you don't know what's there's always, and that's why I feel like I always want to have as much empathy as possible for whoever is standing next to me, because I don't know what that person is going through in that moment.
So what's your closing message for anybody listening?
Oh, I think my closing message is, really the kind of the closing message of the deck, which is experiencing joy, right? Like we didn't get sober to get miserable. We didn't get sober to hide who we are, or, not be able to be our true selves. And I think that as we go out and speak our truth, I think you're going to find that the rewards of it are so great, internally to yourself, and just the simple act of doing service for the next person by sharing your story. And, you don't know who you hit in that audience. And when I speak to Vanderbilt law students every summer, I'm mandatory for their first year law students. And I still get from them, from talks I gave. I've been doing it for 8 years, 9 years. Talks, people will DM me on Instagram and say, I know you don't know me, but I heard you speak at Vanderbilt like 6 years later. And so you are planting seeds left and right.
1,000%.
Yeah.
So I would say to anybody listening, if you're a high achiever who's quietly struggling, like know this. Your success does not make you immune, but your vulnerability doesn't make you weak.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's badass, frankly, I think. And that was what I told myself a lot when I'd be like, oh, how are these people going to receive me? And I'd be like, look what I did. I got sober. Like, that's badass. Like, I'm happy to share that.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if today's episode spoke to you, please rate, review, or share it with somebody who needs to hear it. Like we just said, plant the seeds. And don't forget to hit subscribe for more bold, brave conversations from people living their sobriety out loud. And hey, if you're ready to meet more incredible sober voices in real life, get your ticket now for Amplify Sober Voices happening on January 25th in Orlando. It's going to be a full day of inspiration and community and connection, and I don't want to miss meeting you. Details are at Amplify Sober Rocks or amplifysobervoices.com. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind to yourself, and keep rocking your sober life. Lisa, thank you.
Thank you.